Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Renderman tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at some techniques for recreating an underwater scene, as you've already seen here at the start of the video. We're going to reproduce it a little bit more simply so it's easy to follow along for you here. So we're in Maya at the moment. You can see I've already created a very basic little setup with a hot ocean deformer on a plane. This is 100 by 100 divisions by 100 divisions. And we've got a box that's 20 by 20 by 20. So if you want to recreate that in the exact same way, you can. There's my hot ocean deformer parameters if you want to do your one the exact same. And its dimensions again are 20 by 20. Then we're just using a Pixar rectangle light to make the caustics. I've got the intensity at 100 and the exposure at 5 as well as being normalized. And for this to work with caustics, we also need to go into the advanced and make sure that trace light paths is on, so it can actually create those caustic photons. The material that we're using for our water plane is just a pretty straightforward glass shader. You can see refraction and reflection of 1, and the IOR I've got set to 1.3. You could set it higher if you want to tighten up the caustics, but bear in mind that will magnify any objects that you have above your surface. Render settings is what's going to be important for this one. Under your Renderman settings, I'm only going to render this up to a pretty low rate just for the sake of time, but you'll probably want to go higher than 32 samples. And if you're doing IPRs, I would recommend actually having it on incremental. I found that when having it off, I don't know if this is a bug, but for some reason it doesn't actually translate the caustics correctly. Not sure why that is, and I don't know if it actually affects it in batch render. I don't really have the time to test both ways, but just for the sake of it, I'm going to keep that on. Then you want to make sure that you've selected your PXR VCM integrator. This is what we use for caustics. It's not necessarily what you'd use for rendering the whole scene. You may actually just do a render pass and create an AOV that has got your caustics in it. However, I'm just going to do this all as a beauty render. You could easily split it out with render layers though, like I did in this glasses shot here that was for the synth room. You can see in the breakdown that I've separated the caustics out into a separate render layer, and then just recomposited that after the fact. For our AOVs, we are going to have denoising enabled as well. But going back to our sampling tab, our parameters are as such. I've just lowered the max indirect bounces down to 4. That will still give us enough bounces. We'll save a little bit of render time. We don't really need any more than that. Max diffuse depth I've set to 2 though. It's just so we can get, if there are objects above the water, you'll actually be able to see them correctly when refracting light through this plane. The other thing to bear in mind will be the direction and size of your light. You'll find that you're probably going to get more obvious caustics with a smaller light source, and obviously having it further or closer to your refracting object, which is the water in this case, is going to change its relative size or perceived relative size. So having a small one like that should be okay. I'll do a quick IPR now so we can just have a quick look at what it's going to look like. Okay, so I've just sampled that about 16 samples just quickly in the IPR, and you can see the effect that we're getting. So it's good just to do these quick IPRs to get an idea of the composition of your caustics. This is sort of going to look a little bit like an underwater pool, and to further help with that effect, I've actually changed the light temperature as well. If you enable temperature, set it to something like 8500K, it's going to give you a slightly cooler water effect. You could also change the refraction color of your water material, which I've currently set to white, which would be physically accurate, but you could also set it to like a very light green or sort of aqua type color. I'm just going to set it at white though to keep this simple. Now in the IPR you would notice that I'm seeing a little bit above the water and a little bit below. I actually just want to have the shot set up so it's an actual underwater shot. So the idea here is going to be to have the floor visible and the surface of the underside of the surface visible, and then we're going to be able to cast those nice volume rays through it as well once we get to the compositing stage. So that's pretty much the setup. I'm going to run a batch render on this now. If you haven't looked at the AOV and batch rendering tutorials, make sure you check those out so you've got a better understanding of what we're doing here. There is one other thing that I actually need to do before I jump in. Got my AOV set there, but I also want to make sure that I've got a cryptomat in. To add that, you can just right click there and click PXR crypto map, because we'll be using that for masking once we're in Nuke. And I've got a tutorial for that as well, so you can check that out there. Also for caustics, I have a separate tutorial as well if you want to know more about it, and obviously you can check out the Renderman docs. They're pretty comprehensive on this topic. So now I'm just going to go to Renderman and batch render. I'll pause the recording here. Alright, so our render's finished with a time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So even at 32 samples, obviously you can tell that caustics are going to take a little while to render out. And I was denoising on the GPU, so that was pretty quick, just 5 seconds there. So let's jump into Nuke, grab those files, and continue on. So just to make sure that everything works correctly, and this is particularly important for your volume raise, make sure you start by setting your scene by hitting the S key on your keyboard and switching it to whatever render scale that you're using. I actually used 540p, so I'm going to quickly create a new preset for that. And then just navigate to wherever your project file is, and it'll be under your renders will be under your images, and we just drag those in. So let's have a look at our final renders. We've got the noisy version, we've got the not so noisy version, which is a little bit blurry, obviously not the perfect quality, but like I said, low sample rate. And they've got the crypto matte. So we don't really need that so much right now, but we will definitely be having a look at the crypto matte. So the first thing that we want to do is mask off our water. So we're going to grab a crypto matte node, and the crypto matte is not a default node for Nuke, so make sure you grab that add-on. It's free as well, so you don't have to worry about that. We just hit 1 on the keyboard and control and click on the water surface, and now we've got that as a mask that we can use. Then we're going to create a merge node, and we're going to grab the A output or input, assign that to our beauty filtered, and then our mask, which is on the right hand side there, connected to your crypto matte. So now we've got that there. From that we can create our volume raise. So tab, type in volume raise, and we'll chuck the image into there. So now you can see we've got this position here, and it's shooting the rays through our water source. And what I'll do is set the quality to very high, and I also want to turn off enable radial fall off. That's just so we can set it up quite high, because I want it to be pointing fairly uniformly downwards rather than having this steep angle. If you are trying to simulate a light that's close to the surface, then you may want to do that, but I'm sort of going to have it around here or so. Then we're going to create another merge node, and we're going to set the B to our denoised beauty pass, and the A to our volume raise, and then we can select that node, and I'll just set that to 1 so you can tell what I'm looking at a little bit easier. So we can now blend in our volume rays, blend them in and out as much as you want, and they do animate. If you've got flickering enabled, you can also key in the position if you want it to translate across. And essentially this is just working as like a multiplication, and then it's sort of the highlights are shooting rays out. So it's going to be more intense where your light essentially is pointing at the most, which is in the center in this one, and you can see that kind of matches up with the ground. So that's good. If you want to get a bit more out of it though, you could use a grade and just chuck that into the position between the merge, and then we can just lower the white point, which will sort of burn it in a little bit more. You could actually overdo it if you want, have it something like that, and then use your mix to feather it out. And also don't forget to set your ray length so they're not going through the floor like they were there. And I'll just drop that grade down a little bit. So I'm just using the white point to control this. So something like that. I just wanted to come through the surface a little bit. Something else I could have done to simulate a bit more atmosphere here, or like sort of density in the water, is actually use a Z depth and multiply that in. But I haven't done that because I forgot to do the Z render out of Z AOV. But if you want to see how you can do that, check out this tutorial that I did for neon signs. I use the same method there. You can just apply it here. We could also make our volume rays a little bit more interesting by multiplying a noise into them. So we'll use another merge here, and we'll just chuck that there, and then the A can go into the noise, and then we'll set our merge to be soft light, and this is just going to vary the intensity by the noise. So we're going to change the XY size to be a bit bigger or smaller, depends how complex you want it to look. You could use a multiply operator, but you can see here it is breaking up the volume rays a little bit more, which for underwater makes it a lot more realistic as well. And then you can key this as well. So say you would just chuck a key there, and then at the end of your frame range, set that to say 3. And now when you play through, you should get a nice effect like that. So the volume rays are actually changing in their distance because of the way they're multiplying. In this case, we're actually using soft light, but it sort of acts in the same way as a multiply with your volume rays. So then when we look at that through the scene, which I haven't animated, mind you, but the water is animatable because it's a hot ocean, you'll see you get that sort of effect. And because the volume rays are multiplying by the mask that you've created, here, this water surface, if it is animating, it will respect that. So let's have a look at the version I did for the final that you would have seen in the beginning. So I've done pretty much all the exact same. The only thing that I did slightly differently is I created a mask from our cryptomat that you can see there. So I just selected everything in the scene, though I forgot to select the table, but that doesn't really matter. I just inverted it and made it a mask here, just so the volume rays weren't going outside the tank. And then yeah, as you can see with the volume rays, they're multiplying by a colored surface, so you get a much nicer effect. And I'm using that gray just to push up the values a little bit more. So particularly as it gets towards the further back, it's sort of making it seem a little bit more cloudy. And that is animated, so let's just run through that. So I've just quickly rendered a few frames there, and you can see what a difference that makes with the animation. And the animation of both the flickering from the noise, from the volume rays, and then the noise itself animating across as a multiplier. And if you're a patron this month, you'll grab all the scene assets for this, so you can rebuild it using this fish tank that I've created and do what you like with it. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.